GanonGhidorah, the wise, long-winded owl. If the great Deku Tree was like my father, Ghidorah can be likened to a sagely uncle. He, like the tree, was always watching over me, and handing out strange advice whenever he came to the forest. Raised by a tree and a bird, people question if I'm well-adjusted. Either way, I was always pleased to see the owl whenever he turned up, though he did have the tendency to drone on and on. Needless to say, it was good to see a friendly face after being devastated. Looking back at my childhood, I really do wonder how much of my life was manipulated by outside forces. That thought first occurred to me when I realized Ghidorah's true identity. The fear and relief of not being dead immediately after stepping out of the forest had a short life. Stepping out from the line of trees and into the open fields of Hyrule was astounding. The wide open space and blue sky overhead was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Before anyone asks, I have no idea why the programmers decided to have me move faster moving backwards. Either way, I took the time to stop and marvel at the gates of Castle Town. I remember seeing them the first time. They were so large and powerfully built, unlike any of the tree houses I was used to. And yet they were still familiar. That was when I realized that they were the gates I saw in my dream. All of this was spurring me on to move forward. But it was foolish of me to be overwhelmed by this beauty. I soon had my first encounter with the dangers of the outside world. I was so distracted that the sun had set beyond the horizon, and the drawbridge to Castletown lifted before I could cross it. I was now locked outside of the town, and I rather immediately realized why that was a bad thing. Stylechilds, the cursed result of children, Kokiri or Hylian, who die out in Hyrule fields. We Kokiri had legends about them, believing that we would instantly transform into one if we ever left the forest. They're not particularly dangerous when they're not in great numbers, but I was a kid back then, easily frightened and panicked. It was the first time I had fought throughout the night, but it's what I had to do to save myself. Castletown's marketplace was an entirely new world to me. I had heard rumors of tall people twice the size of Kokiri called adults. The Kokiri don't particularly care for outsiders, but they usually end up making their way into the Lost Woods anyway. Pitiable fools. I personally had never seen one in my life up until this point. The market was full of strange people, and many noises as everyone went about their business. Crowds of people walking around, engaging in commerce, and filling the air with conversations. It was far more active than I had ever seen in the Kokiri forest. I immediately felt out of place and wary of what to do next. I didn't exactly know where to go to find this castle or the princess. The best I could do was ask around, or maybe overhear some useful information. Admittedly, looking back on my childhood, I realize that it is a bit creepy that grown men keep referring to how cute the young princess was, and how one of them even tried to sneak into the castle just to get a look at her. But I was a kid then, and not likely to press the matter anyway, especially considering that he had just given me exactly what I needed to know. The best part about Castletown, there was always something to do. I know I was on an important business, but I couldn't help it. I was a kid. I was overwhelmed and confused, and all thoughts of vengeance had been pushed out of my head. I figured that it couldn't hurt to stop at the local shooting gallery and practice my skills. Needless to say, I really impressed the gamekeeper and won the first of many prizes. In hindsight, it only seems fitting that I make a stop here. This whole place will have its own story to be told, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is Milan. She was one of the first friends that I made outside of the Kokiri forest. She always had this really magnetic, perky personality, like she was invulnerable to the world around her. It was infectious. I always had a soft spot for whenever she called me Fairy Boy. Looking back with memories of Milan, I can only help but wonder, what if? The only way to truly see Hyrule Castle is in the daylight. Its grace, majesty, and authority radiating from its walls. It was the biggest thing I had ever seen back in those days, and it was heavily guarded. But then again, Kokiri can be very sneaky, and could easily pass unseen if we wanted to, and I already knew where to look. For point of clarity, I actually did all this under the cover of night. Even I'm not stupid enough to go lurking around a heavily guarded fortress in the daylight. And this is how I found Talon. He'd become very important to the story of my life later on, not just for being Milan's father, but more so to do with his own past before he came to Hyrule, back when he was still a younger man. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. And thanks to Milan's help, that is how I was able to infiltrate Hyrule Castle with a live chicken in my shirt. Sneaking past these guys was so easy it became comical at some point. Of course, I always treated this like a game to begin with. I didn't quite know the significance of those portraits in the window. It would take me years to figure out what they meant, and how it was tied into Hyrule's dark and sordid past. The moment I saw her face, I was doomed. At first, I was just confused at the sight of her, remembering I had seen her in my dream. Perhaps it really was a vision of the future. But that soon was pushed out of my head the moment she first smiled at me. This girl wasn't like Saria or even Milan. That hopeful and needful look in her eyes, I felt my insides sink and a pleasant warmth fill me. What could I say? I was a kid, and I was flustered. Though, I'd like to point out the irony of having an active chicken under my tunic during this conversation. It was strange. I felt like I knew this girl from before, and she felt the same of me, like we had some kind of connection before this meeting. But regardless of what it was, a stupid childhood crush or destiny, there was no denying that there was a bond between us, and this was undoubtedly an important meeting in my life, because she is the one who did all of this to me. Needless to say, I had been listening to her story intently. After all, the Deku Tree and Gabora had specifically sent me here to see her, and so far this dream that she had matched up. So when she offered to let me look through the window, I was certain I'd be getting my answer. And I did. There he was, the man from my dream. Bright red hair, fiery sinister eyes, and clad in black armor. Ganondorf Dragmire, the king of the Gerudos. When Zelda mentioned that he hailed from the desert, my surprise quickly turned to rage, and thoughts of vengeance overcame me again. He was the man who killed the Deku Tree, and now he was planning to take over all of Hyrule. And I knew then and there that I would not rest until I saw him dead. Admittedly, it wasn't the smartest decision on either of our parts, but we were both children, and I was after the man's blood. After all, if the Triforce could grant Ganondorf a wish to rule the world, if we got to it first, we could wish to defeat him. Oh, how wrong we were. I often wonder how different things would have been if we hadn't started meddling. How much of this was our fault. We were young, naive, stupid. But if it's any consideration, it was her plan. I just went along with it because I clearly wasn't thinking at the time. I was just excited to have something with her name on it. This is Impa, one of the last active Sheikah in Hyrule. She was a good mentor and caretaker for Zelda, although she was a bit of an enabler and didn't do much to keep the girl in line. I always tilted my head at this. A special secret song that implies a connection to the royal family and can be used to reveal Hyrule's secrets, and she uses it for a lullaby? Needless to say, the song still haunts me to this day. What can I say? I was a kid, and I was curious to see what this mystical password song could do. I had no idea the results would be so... explosive. These are Redeads, living zombies that freeze their targets with an eerie shrill and then drains the life from them. They're not really as scary nor as dangerous as everyone makes them out to be. If anything, they're more like a nuisance. Needless to say, the Sun Song is useful for these situations. I didn't look down on Dampé for being different. I figured that would be very hypocritical of me. In a sense, I didn't interact with him as much during my time in Hyrule. But before you all see the full picture, Dampé will still have his role to play. It's incredible, really. He was one of the few people smart enough to get away when it happened. Alas, poor Dampé. I knew him. Full disclosure here, I didn't find this shield in a chest. I actually recovered it from the royal family's tomb. Apparently, it had been buried with its previous owner. Yes, I admit this is grave robbery, but the needs must when the occasion demands it. I wouldn't come back to this graveyard for some time after this. Apart from running a few errands and coming back to collect those gold spiders, I wouldn't need to come back here until I was a man. And I realized exactly what the royal family tried to bury out here. The gold spiders? You're wondering why it is that I've been killing them and collecting their tokens? Well, let me show you. There is a house in Kakariko they call the home of Skulltula. It is a tale of greed and foolishness. A local family that had made their stake in the recently opened Kakariko had heard the legends of the treasures opened by the village leader. He was rumored to have had many treasures buried in a secret cavern beneath his house. But now the old man was dead and his house was abandoned. They went into the house, found the cavern, and buried down there was a chest of golden skull coins. And they took them all. They spent them, traded them away. It's how they made their entire fortune and their reputation. But the more they gave them away, too late they began to realize their humanity was slipping away from them. And now that the coins were released into the world, the spiders had been unleashed. It was my first indication the kind of evil that lay beneath Kakariko village. The old man's house stood where the town well is now. I wasn't sure I believed in the curse, until I noticed the frequency of the spiders about. I decided to test it, and I certainly got my answer rather quickly. Maybe these people deserved it, but I couldn't stand to see them reduced to this, so I took it upon myself to break the curse. The 100 spiders of the curse must be destroyed, and their tokens returned to the well, where they could be at rest once and for all. I find it ironic that the game gave me wallet upgrades. At least in this game. At this point, I had only the slightest idea how money worked at all. Not to say I didn't know anything, but what I am saying, I didn't get any wallet upgrades here, and not from this family. At least, not yet. Either way, it was now time for me to head up Death Mountain Trail. My journey begins here.